Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And today we have Professor Kei Yamamoto, and the title of his talk is Envy, Democracy, and Communism, which seems very interesting for me because my also I have interested in this topic because
Mhm.
one of my studying
Mhm.
issue is about the relationship between democracy and affection
All right.
or passion.
Uh-huh.
So envy is also a very important side of the human being. So I think Professor Yamamoto Kei will invite us to a very interesting discussion. So Professor Yamamoto Kei, please start your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Kei Yamamoto. Let me introduce myself again. I'm teaching political theory and political philosophy at Ritsumeikan University in Kyoto. Thank you so much for inviting me to the second round of SSK. But first, I have to apologize for the delay in sending my PowerPoint to my discussant, Professor Han. I'm really sorry. Okay. Last time, in the first round of SSK, I made a presentation about post-Marxism, especially about the radical democracy and left-wing populism of Ernest Laclau and Chantal Mouffe. Today, I'd like to change the direction a little bit, and I want to talk about a topic I have been working on recently. The title of my presentation is Envy, Democracy, and Communism. You may think that, okay, envy is important, but this is not a Marxist topic. I think you may think about, you may think so, but I believe that we have to take this very tricky emotion seriously for the future of communism. And I believe this is very important topic to develop the Marxist theory on the theory of communism. Let me begin from the background. Why envy matters? Envy must be an emotion that we are all more or less familiar with. When you see your neighbor driving a fancy car, or when your colleague published a brilliant paper in a top journal, envy grows quietly in your heart and gradually starts to torment you, maybe every day, every night. I think lots of researchers is very familiar with this emotion, I think. But generally speaking, envy is considered to be a very bad affection. It is also counted as one of the 7 deadly sins of Christianity, and it is said to be the most infamous one in them. I'm going to take another example from Japanese context. Yukichi Fukuzawa, who is a Japanese thinker in Meiji era, once said that envy is a completely negative thing and never has a positive side. As you can see from here, envy is a very unpleasant emotion for both individuals and society as a whole. Therefore, inner envy in our heart is usually concealed. No one wants to admit that they are envious guys, so it's hard to discover from outside he is envious or she is envious. Usually we can't find. For example, Herman Melville's famous work, Billy Butt, describes this sentiment as follows. In Billy Butt, is envy then such a monster? Where though many unarranged mortal has in hopes of mitigated penalty, pleaded guilty to horrible actions. Did ever anybody seriously confess to envy? Something there is in it universally felt to be more shameful than ever felonious crime. As we can see here, we do not easily admit the existence of envy in our minds. Perhaps because of this tendency, envy has not become the subject of political thought and real political analysis so far. Helmut Schack, who has written very important work about envy around 60 years ago. This book, Envy, very big book, like a Theory of Justice of Roles. Anyway, Helmut Schack once told that it is most curious to note that at about the beginning of this century, authors began to show an increasing tendency, above all in the social sciences and moral philosophy, to replace the concept of envy. If so, we do not really understand how much this infamous feeling distorts our judgments and evaluations. This is the background of my presentations. This is the content of presentation. In this presentation, I'm going to focus on envy. First, I consider the characteristics of envy from classical works of different thinkers. And by doing so, I try to differentiate envy from other similar affects. Then I'm going to show that demands for equality and fairness are inseparably related to envy. I consider, this is John Rawls, who is a very famous political philosopher. John Rawls' project for eliminating envy from his just society in his theory of justice. I will argue that democracy cannot exclude envy in the end. Finally, based on these findings, I'm going to examine the relationship between envy and communism to come. This is the contents. I'm going to speak. Okay. Sorry. So what is envy? Historically speaking, there are a variety of reflections on this theme in many famous works, such as those of Aristotle, Immanuel Kant, John Stuart Mill, and so on. Here, we see the definition by Immanuel Kant. Kant says in the Metaphysics of Morals, envy is a propensity to view the well-being of others with distress, even though it does not detract from one's own. The envious envious man or woman cannot stand the happiness of his or her neighbor. The point is that the happiness of your neighbor has nothing to do with your gains or losses. Nevertheless, the happiness of others is represented as intolerable for you. Furthermore, an important characteristic of envy is comparison. Aristotle said in his rhetoric as follows, it is clear also what kind of people we envy. That was included in what has been said already. We envy those who are near us in time, place, age, or reputation. We may be envious of our neighbors who are treated just a little bit better than we are. But we are not envious of millionaires like Donald Trump or Bill Gates, but we envy our neighbors. Yeah. So we can say that where there is no comparison, there is no envy. This is a very important point of this feeling. By the way, an emotion that is often confused with envy is jealousy. In general, jealousy is much more harmless than envy. Jealousy is much better. And jealousy is typically more socially acceptable, like jealousy for your lover. However, it is sometimes difficult to make a clear distinction between envy and jealousy. And the two emotions are often mixed. A German sociologist, Georg Simmel, tries to distinguish between envy and jealousy in his sociology. According to him, he said, where attainment is concerned, we should speak of envy, and where preservation, rather of jealousy. So, yeah, it's difficult to make a distinction, but we can. But it is possible. It is still possible to differentiate these two emotions. And yeah, important point: envy is much harmed than jealousy, in generally speaking. Okay. In relation to jealousy and envy, resentment is also important. Actually, sorry, I want to quote Nietzsche and Max Scherer's works in this presentation, but I didn't have time to check the English version of their works. So I try to paraphrase their argument here in my way. According to Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche, the man of resentment creates an evil enemy and projects himself as a good person. He can only affirm himself by denying his neighbors. And then, according to Max Scherer, we can see resentment in the fable of the fox and the sour grapes. Resentment is a function of our mind to comfort unfulfilled needs by denying their values of what we want. Therefore, envy can be a cause of resentment, and therefore it can be distinguished from resentment itself. And lastly, I make a short reference to Schadenfreude. There's something called Schadenfreude in the field of psychology. Schadenfreude is a very shameful emotion in that it draws pleasure from the misfortune of others. As you can easily imagine, this is closely related to the feeling of envy. This means, I'll try to explain, if you are envious of somebody, if that guy make a failure, you can have a joy, or you can be so happy. This is a Schadenfreude. So when we see the misfortune of others, envy is transformed into Schadenfreude. Jealousy, resentment, Schadenfreude. I remind three emotions. Envy, which is the subject of this presentation, seems to open at a unique realm that partially overlaps with these other affects, but does not exactly match with any of them. In this presentation, I'm going to approach the uniqueness of this subject from the relationship between envy and democracy. So, what impact does envy have on our society? In the first place, envy is, of course, an individual emotion. I have envy, or he has envy, or individual emotion. But it is also a phenomenon that is observed socially and collectively. And in recent years, there are some studies, some researches that analyze the influence of envy on policies and people's political behavior. This is a book, Envy in Politics, from Princeton University Press. Actually, but my point today is that envy is much more important in democratic society. To think about the connection between these, let me take up ostracism here. As you know well, ostracism is a kind of system or device to expel somebody who is in danger of becoming a tyrant from police in the ancient Greeks, in Greek city-state, for example, Athens. In a standard textbook of political theory or political philosophy or political history, whatever, it is often introduced as a system unique to ancient Greece to prevent the rise of tyrants and to maintain democracy. The problem is that ostracism was not only a device for maintaining democratic politics, but also an outlet for possibly envy of the people. Let's take a look at what a Roman biographer Plutarchus tells about Aristides. This is the picture of Plutarchus. Aristides was known as his justice. He's a just man, he's nice. Anyway, he's a very, he collected lots of respect from people. But gradually, he became a target of envy of the people. And the people tried to push him into ostracism. And that is to say, ostracism was not an attempt to bring down the powerful man, but it was a device to calm the envy of the people. This is the story Plutarchus told us. But it is difficult to say how much we should take Plutarchus' account seriously. Plutarchus is describing an event that occurred 1 or 2 centuries before his own. And young Elster, for example, has expressed his doubt that Plutarchus' interpretation lacks contemporaneous support. Therefore, we need to accept Plutarchus' theory with some reservations. But nevertheless, it is highly symbolic, very symbolic, that the feeling of envy was already inscribed in the origins of democracy. At least Plutarchus thought so. This fact is important in considering the relationship between envy and democracy. So, So what about modern democratic politics? Until now, the demand for equality and social justice has always been suspicious of whether it must be a cover of envy. For example, Sigmund Freud, he's the founder of psychoanalysis. He believes that the demand for social justice as fairness comes from envy. According to him, equality and fairness is not a noble idea, but just the flip side of vicious emotion, which is envy, of course. In his group psychology and the analysis of the ego. In order to consider this problem, let me take Søren Kierkegaard as a person who most sharply perceived the relationship between envy and equality. From Kierkegaard's point of view, the revolutionary era was a passionate era. However, the present age is essentially an era of no passion. In such an era, envy brings phenomenon of leveling, which is a kind of equality, equal situation. Everybody has to be same. Everybody has to be average. Nobody can be prominent. He calls the phenomenon of leveling. Sorry, I quote lots of people. Next one is Francis Fukuyama. He brought a similar insight into 20th century. Fukuyama, of course, is known, very well known for his kind of optimistic prospect about the victory of liberal democracy at the end of history. But the real important point of his end of history is not in his Hegelian view. Rather, his true point lies in the debate about tumors. he argues that tumors puts our liberal democracy in crisis. Now, what is tumors? Tumors is a part of the soul that seeks recognition. It concerns our feelings of dignity, which we are proud of when positively acknowledged by others, and cause anger and shame when we are unjustified. As is well known, Plato in ancient Greece, Plato divided the human soul into three parts: logos, eros, and tumors. Fukuyama regards tumors as need for recognition. What is the interesting point about Fukuyama's argument is that he distinguishes two types of tumors. First, he calls the desire of superiority as megalosomia. And second, the desire to be recognized as equal to others is isomia. And according to Fukuyama, under liberal democracy, megalosomia has been forbidden and isomia has become hegemonic. In other words, it is characteristic of modern times that the desire for superiority is hidden underground, and the desire for equality is widespread. The same argument has been developed in his more recent works. Fukuyama argues, he says, the rise of modern democracy is the story of the displacement of megalosomia by isomia. Societies that only recognized an elite who were replaced by ones that recognized everyone as inherently equal. In any case, although there is a subtle difference between envy and tumors, a little different, but very similar, it is clear that Fukuyama's argument is very parallel to that of Kierkegaard's. This fact shows the complex relationship between envy and equality. What pushes us to the equality, according to Kierkegaard and Fukuyama, that is the feeling of envy. Okay. So I move to the next questions. So dealing with feeling of envy is very difficult. So if we correct excessive inequality and realize social injustice, can we avoid this effect? This is a direction proposed by the political philosopher John Rawls. In his theory of justice, Rawls spends two sections for envy, which are section 80, the problem of envy, and section 81, envy and equality. Actually, people don't read theory of justice from first to the end. So that's why, that's because these section 80 and 81 has not been read so much. People just read only the part one and what is the original position, what is the veil of ignorance. People don't read the theory of justice at the last. But important point is, for me, section 80 and section 81, this is the latter part of the theory of justice. This is a very important part. And in these sections, his goal is to show that the just society he envisions will not be threatened by envy. Here we have a look at his argument very quickly. Let me review Rawls' premises. In John Rawls' conception of justice, people in original position are consistently rational and not distracted by any particular psychological disposition. For this reason, envy was initially in part one of theory of justice. Envy was excluded from Rawls' argument in part one. Here, still, Rawls thinks that rational individuals are not afflicted by envy. Under these a kind of ideal conditions, people would choose the principle of justice. And it is in part 3 of Theory of Justice that Rawls confronts what he has eliminated again. Here, Rawls examines, in these parts, Rawls examines the stability of his conception of justice. Thus, Rawls' point would be whether his theory of justice can deal with the particular psychology, or particular disposition, like envy, and whether it can be dangerous enough to destroy the principle of justice. Now, in section 80, Rawls defines envy as follows in very Kantian way. We may think of envy as a propensity to view with hostility the greater good of others, even though their being more fortunate than we are does not detract from our advantages. We envy persons whose situation is superior to ours, and we are willing to deprive them of their greater benefits, even if it is necessary to give up something ourselves. In these sections, Rawls' point is to show that his society of justice can restrict the explosion of excusable envy, because the economic difference among people in his just society will be not so large, and his principles of justice will support their self-affirmation as well. So envy is okay, no problem. Rawls try to persuade us. And he said, I conclude then, Rawls said, that the principles of justice are not likely to arouse excusable general envy to a troublesome extent. By this test, the conception of justice, again, seems relatively stable. That means we do not have to take into account the emotional envy in thinking about public things. But my question is it true? It's okay. So to think about Rawls, to examine and to consider Rawls' reasoning, I want to take Zizek's critiques. He argues that Rawls fails to capture the nature of envy. In Rawls, envy was supposed to be reduced in his just society. However, this Rawlsian reasoning is not so self-evident. For example, when the social hierarchical order is supposed to be fair and legitimate, you have to accept your low status in society as a legitimate ones. You cannot blame anyone or injustice. Zizek discusses as follows. What Rawls doesn't see is how such a Rawlsian just society would create the conditions for an uncontrolled explosion of resentment. In it, I would know that my inferior status is fully justified and would be deprived of blaming my failure on social injustice. And then, furthermore, Rawls proposes a terrifying model of society in which hierarchy is directly legitimized in natural properties, missing the simple lesson of tale about a Slovenian peasant who is told by a good witch. The witch says to a peasant, I will do to you whatever you want, but I warn you, I will do it to your neighbor twice. The peasant thinks first, then smiles a cunning smile, and tells her, take one of my eyes. This is a story. If this criticism has to do with the fact that a decrease in inequality does not necessarily reduce the incentive for envy. record that in Lordian just society, inequality was not supposed to be excessive, not so excessive. But it is likely that a decrease in inequality will rather bring up more intense envy. We have to remind Aristotle's point. Aristotle pointed out if envy arises between comparable persons, the narrower the economic gap between people is, the more unbearable the small difference will become. I think that this definitely this point is very this fact points to the fragile place of Lordian theory of justice. Okay. Finally, I'm trying to talk about envy and democracy. Rawls tried to exclude envy from his vision of justice. But my point is that envy cannot be eliminated in a democratic society. More to the point, envy is not entirely bad in a democratic society. This is the most important point in my presentation. What do I mean? What do I mean? Now, of course, one of the core values of liberal democracy is equality. Equality is very important things in our liberal democratic society. However, as we have found in Kierkegaard, the equality achieved by prohibiting envy is nothing but uniformity, which is not so democratic. As Hartley's, L.P. Hartley's novel Facial Justice portrayed in his novels, we have to have a same face, same appearance, not to have because if there's a difference of our appearances, the envy has come. This is L.P. Hartley's novel. Sorry. As Hartley's novel Facial Justice portrayed, the realization of excessive equality forbidden to the difference in appearance must be a kind of dystopia. It's not that we need to erase envy, but it's that we need to somehow come to terms with it for democracy. Again, a society in which envy is completely banned is likely to be a stifling society that does not tolerate any differences. It's the point where equality and difference intersect is the home of envy. The evil emotion that should be eliminated immediately from society, as many thinkers have felt since ancient times. It means that a democratic society needs to recognize the existence of this emotion and provide an appropriate place for it. This is my proposal in my presentation. Thus, envy is not a destroyer of democratic society, but rather a twin born from the same soil as democracy, and an inevitable ethos of democracy. If this is the case, then the study of envy is not a merely trivial one, not a trivial one, but it's connected to the very core problem of democracy. How do we come to terms with the envy and democracy? This question will be the future challenge for the coming study of envy. Actually, I want to call this project Envyology. So finally, in conclusion, I want to proceed to my second question. Actually, it has been, this is about communism finally. As I showed, that democracy has a deep relationship with envy. So what about communism then? Since communism also has equality as one of its ideals, the shadow of envy creeps in here as well. If this is the case, we need to consider the following two questions. First, what makes us desire communism? Why we hope to be communism? Why we hope communism? And secondly, does communism free us from envy? As you all know, there has been a lot of discussion about post-capitalism in recent years. With the worsening economic difference and the, for example, climate crisis becoming a pressing issue, post-capitalism seems to have become almost like a consensus of the left. Nevertheless, I think, this is my opinion, communism, what is communism? This is still remains an empty sniff here. Of course, the specific vision of what form it will take is our challenge for our future. However, what I'm worrying about is that the debate over communism doesn't go much beyond that of democracy or radical democratic politics, because such a post-capitalistic societies debate, people are talking about participation, civil society, and dialogue, whatever. If those things, participation, civil society, are also important in communism, how different is it from democracy? I'd like to end my talk by posing a question to you all. If communism follows radical democratic ideals, of course without capitalism, but a very similar discussion with radical democracy, then how does communism deal with the problem of envy? This is my something we want to have a discussion from now on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Kei Yamamoto. It was very interesting topic because it's very unique. It's very unique. So I think your question is very important. So let me have a chance to raise a question and so I think Professor Yamamoto Kei, what I think is the envy has in two aspects. Mm-hmm. Your presentation about envy has to do with Marxism in two aspects. Mm-hmm. First, Marx criticized the conception of rough communism. I'm not sure if it is a good translation.
Rough communism.
In his book, mm-hmm. Paris Manuscript. Mm-hmm. Paris Manuscript, 1844. Mm-hmm. So he criticized communism as a leveling, not emancipation. Crude communism is crude communism is an exact expression. Crude communism.
Communism, okay.
Yes, so in this aspect, his perspective is similar with Nietzsche's criticism of Resentiment. Mm-hmm. I think communism does not mean leveling or get rid of differentiation, but it means emancipation of all people. So, and the second, it's envy has to do with Marxism in reference with in relation with unification of working class,
Mm-hmm.
unite
Yeah.
unity of working class. So what we are seeing in ordinary cases,
Mm-hmm.
many workers envy another workers,
Yeah.
and
Right.
for example, there is a strike of trade union,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
this trade union cannot get enough support from another working class. Instead, many working class envy those trade unionists, and they blame the strike. And sometimes we see domestic workers envy foreign workers. So
Mm-hmm.
they say foreign workers are stealing their jobs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right.
Go home, go home. So they say just go home. So what? So the ideal of the working class unity cannot
Yeah.
be achieved by this envy situation. So I think this is a very important issue. So my question is, at last of your presentation, you said envy is nevertheless inevitable ethos of democracy. So
Yeah. This is my point. Yeah.
yes. So I want to ask, what does it mean exactly, and how a democratic society can control envy so that the society as a whole cannot be destroyed from it. So this is what I want to ask. Oh, and thank you very much for the interesting presentation.
Uh, Thank you very much, Professor Han. You said the very important point of my presentation. I think you refer the difference between 2 points. One is the ideas that Marx said in the Paris.
This
Marx said
manuscript.
Paris manuscript. So his communism is not crude communism. I think in his communism there is no envy among workers or among people. I think he tried to describe his communism going beyond such trivial emotions. But in reality, always we are suffering the envy each other. So how can we control? As you said, I think as Lord did, I think we cannot erase or exclude this envy from our society so easily. It's impossible for me. So we have to control it. But you said, how can we control it? But actually, this is also my questions as well. It's a very difficult point. If we cannot avoid the feeling of envy, how can we be dealing with this very tricky that is actually that's a point I'm now working on recently. So sorry, I cannot answer now here, but I want to have some hint or clues to think about this problem from you all.
Yeah, maybe. Oh,
Yeah, have
thank
any
you.
idea?
No. I also don't have an answer, but maybe this topic is also important for for populism analysis.
Yeah.
Yes, because right-wing populism is also a kind of expression of envy, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so nationalist there might be nationalist envy or some kind of envy, chauvinism. So right-wing populism may be a kind of envy. So elite is and maybe is Resentiment is also a motive in some way, a motive of populist politics.
Yeah.
So maybe it can be connected.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Sometimes I connected my argument with the as you said, the right-wing populist politics. But my idea, the one I'm now thinking about is how can we distract our envy from our neighbors to the rich man or establishment. As Aristotle said, the comparison is, we need a comparison to have envy to somebody. But if we can have envy to the establishment people or rich people, it becomes a very big power to change the world or change the society, you know. This is just one idea, but I don't know how to do it. How can we envy Donald Trump or Bill Gates or such a very super rich people? If underclass or underdogs people envy such a very rich people or super rich people, it can be a very revolutionary power to change a capitalist society. But I'm not sure it is possible or not.
Okay. And there is a question from Professor Chang Sang-jin. And so
yep.
This is a little bit long.
Okay, I'm going to talk. Can I read? Thank you very much for a very interesting talk. Yeah, thank you. I agree with that. We should not criticize the emotion of envy as bad or sinful feeling. I also agree with you that the emotion of envy has positive function in that it is the emotion behind the people's criticism of the unequal and unfair society. Yeah, indeed, the emotion of envy helps the people struggle to build an egalitarian and democratic society. Yeah. Thank you. Two questions. What would be a proper translation of envy in Japanese, Korean, and Chinese word? Yeah, okay. Second, could you explain more about the political implication of your arguing for envy? Do you think that the emotion of envy could contribute to the building of a post-capitalist society, i.e. communism, beyond the democratic and egalitarian capitalism? Because the envy might conflict with the solidarity, cooperation, and diversity, i.e. the fundamental principles of post-capitalist communism. Okay, Professor Theodin, thank you so much for your two questions. This is a very critical and crucial point, I think. The first one is, actually, the word of translation of envy is not determined. Some people use it, the first one, senbo. In Japanese, we read senbo. But some people use the third one, shito. Yeah, so it depends. It depends people. But I actually like to the third one, shito. I'm using shito. But some person uses this word for jealousy. It's a little complicated. There's no specific translation. It depends on the academic field, in the psychology and in political philosophy. Okay. And the second question is, I think, much more crucial. My point is, I'm not sure we can use envy to build a more egalitarian society. I'm not sure about this point. But we cannot avoid this question, I think, this question of envy. But for example, John Rawls want to avoid this question, and he refers to this emotion very quickly. It's okay, no problem. Envy will be repressed in his just society. But I think this is too easy. This is too optimistic about this feeling. This is my point. So I have to. I want to say we have to take this feeling more seriously, without thinking about that. It would be in vain if we consider what is communism, what is equal societies. Without okay, so is it okay? But I'm not so okay. Let me summarize. I'm not sure envy is good for our communism to come, but we cannot avoid this question. We need to think about this problem more seriously. Yeah, if I don't know whether this point has been discussed in Marxist studies. So if there's something literature, early literature, please. I'm very happy if you teach me some articles or literatures. Thank you. Thank you, Serge. Professor Serge. And I think
yes, Marta has something to contribute. So, okay.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, but a little bit louder, please.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. I'm here in public place. I don't want to scream or yeah, just can you hear me if I speak like that?
Yes. Yeah. I think you can speak a little bit slowly. I will understand you.
Okay.
Your comment. Yeah.
So thank you first for your presentation. It was very interesting. Yeah, and I wanted to say because I think your key question is like, how will envy be dealt in communism? Because yeah, as we all think that in communism there will be no there will be a whole equality, something like that. So envy might have no place. Many people maybe think like that, or envy will just die out or whatever. And but actually, I think this has a quite simple solution, and I think we could already observe such solutions in Syria, I mean in the Soviet Union, or in the former German socialist state. That if, for example, here in capitalism, if you are jealous of somebody or you envy somebody, and this, okay, let's not say jealous, let's say envy, because this, as I read, as I could hear today, it is more focused with accomplishment. I mean, it is more related to success, accomplishment, rather than jealousy, which is more a personal thing, as you argued. So let's say if a guy is envious of another guy, of his accomplishments, of his success, let's say in wherever, and he want to be better, and the fruits of this, him being better, the fruits and the result may be a good one. his own fruits, right? He won't share it with others. It's only his own fruits in capitalism. But in socialism, there are other ideals, and these ideals can be accomplished a lot more easy than in capitalism, because the economic basis is very different. It is an equal economic basis. So in socialism, let's say if there's still a guy who's a bit jealous or envious of of the competitor who's better in educational terms or in knowledge or in achieving whatever, he will also try to be better, right? To give his best, because he wants to be acknowledged too. But the difference is the fruits of this being better, the fruits of this competition will not be his own, but he will contribute these fruits to the whole society, to the development of the society. That is a very different point, I think. And so actually during capitalism, I think that envy is a very selfish, a very bad thing. But in communism, well, not always, sometimes of course it can be good too in capitalism, but generally. But in communism, because the economic basis is altered, is modified, this paradigm totally changes everything. You know what I mean?
So your question is, in capitalist societies, envy is serious, but in communist societies, you believe envy is not so serious one. This is your point?
Envy might be serious too, but on a comradeship basis, on a friendly basis, which is whose fruits will be for everybody. You know, there will be no real. For example, I grew up in Western Berlin, in Germany, Western Berlin. I was about 11 years old when the wall fell down. And so after that, when I was like 20, and I got my first vocational training as a secretary, actually, for foreign languages, a simple secretary for any office. And there were actually only two, because this was like 9 years after the wall came down. So the ideas, the behavioral pattern was still the same. Actually, it didn't alter a lot. Now it's somehow completely altered. Eastern Germans became totally like Western Germans. But back then it wasn't still. And so in my class, there were two girls who were from the former DDR, from the former Eastern Berlin, and the rest were all of Western females. And I could observe, I didn't like that class at all. That's why I quit that vocational training, because it was a very selfish vocational training. You know, the competition between all the female future secretaries was quite bad, and I couldn't understand why. But the only ones who tried to to have no competition, but always have all of the female classmates work together, were those two girls from the former DDR. Their behavioral pattern was totally different. And I could observe that not only during that time, but during several occasions while living in Germany. And I think envious or generally all kind of emotions will change their will have a total change once communism or first socialism is installed, because the economical basis of economic basis allows this, you know. Yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to say.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah. Actually, I couldn't hear your voice. Only half. So
I'm so sorry. My mic was a bit
yeah. Thank you so much for your interesting episode. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Maybe you couldn't understand everything.
Sorry. Okay. Yeah.
Maybe Sangwon, Mr. Han Sangwon, you understood, you could hear what I was saying.
I think I heard the point of your talk. So
Yeah.
maybe your idea is that in communism, envy can be a positive one, positive
Yeah.
emotion.
Right.
But in capitalism, it has only negative side, because everyone generally, yes. So, but in communism, economic base will be changed, so envy can be a creative aspect. So
very interesting. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I understand. So yeah, it's very interesting. That is a point I have never thought. Yeah, in communism, in communism, the economic situation change the characteristic of envy in a more creative way. You mean that's the point you mentioned. And if I envy somebody's somebody's who are better than me, I want to be like him or her. So I try to more hard. I try to study harder, and then I can be much more smarter. Like that's a point you mentioned.
Not. I think in communism it won't be so much about being smarter, but being useful for others, being helpful. You know, because well, I had been jobless for a long time, and I actually back then, well, now actually I'm jobless too, but well, I'm now a student. But when I was jobless a long time, I felt very useless. I felt like I want to do something so others can receive good things from me too. And that being useful is a very intrinsic need of a human being, because human being normally is a creature who lives in cannot live alone. You know?
Yeah.
And so I think in
so envy can be helpful and useful in communism to improve the situations. You mean improve the situations, our situations. Oh yeah, that's good. Interesting point. Yeah, I have never thought that. That's it. Yeah, I want to bring back that point to my work, to my research. Thank you so much, Mark.
Thank you very much for your presentation today too.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
So is there any question? Any questions? No. A small one. With Professor Yamamoto Kei. Kei is your first name, or?
Kei is my first.
So okay.
Just call me Kei.
Kei. Okay. And so, oh, are there any further questions to Kei? Oh. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's finish then our talk. So I want to thank you very much, Kei, for your interesting presentation. So and let us think seriously about our emotional aspects in more democratic and communist society. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kei.
Thank you. Professor Seojin, do you plan to do in third round of SSK or in?
Oh, so yes, we are planning the third round in this autumn.